Good day, everyone. We are the Group 2, and today we are going to discuss Module 7, which is entitled Moral Self, Living with Purpose, Personal Value and Philosophy of Life. So every day we are confronted with problems and dilemmas. Solving this requires one to decide what kind of action or response to make, and these actions are fueled by our own moral reasoning and our idea of what are moral behaviors. In this module, you will be acquainted with what are the concepts related to morality. How do we form our moral reasoning based on Piaget and Kohlberg's theory? And how can parenting styles and practices affects not only our ability to create morally acceptable behaviors, but also how it affects ourselves as a whole. Here are the learning outcomes. First, we can explain the basic concepts related to morality and moral self. Second, we can identify behavior's characteristic of the different stages of moral development by Kohlberg, and identify behavior's characteristic of the different stages of the intellectual development by Piaget. Third, we can state the differences and factors related to the moral self. Fourth, we can evaluate practices that lead to the development of desirable moral values. And lastly, we can apply concepts on morality in particular situation to develop a philosophy of life.
So before I start, I'm going to give you different quotes from different philosophers. The perfecting of oneself is the fundamental base of all progress and all moral development by Confucius. Family and moral values are so central to everything that I am by Mariam Wright Edelman. Try not to become a man of success, but rather try to become a man of value by Albert Einstein. Wisdom, compassion, and courage are the three universally recognized moral qualities of a man by Confucius. So I believe that this quote gives you now the idea of morality, which is what we will be discussing for today. So in every day, people are confronted with dilemmas. Solving them requires one to decide on what kind of actions or response to make. In some instances, it is easy for one to respond to a difficult situation, while in some cases, choosing the best response is difficult. But before we dive into our topic, I'm going to define first what is dilemma. So, it is a problematic situation in which a difficult choice must be made. Most of the time, the consequences of any of the choices or options are perceived to be negative and unappealing to the person involved. That kind of responses or actions taken or made when one is in quandary serves as a good test of a person's level of moral development. What is moral? It is related to the sense or a standard that determines what is right and what is wrong. It distinguishes correct from incorrect or appropriate from inappropriate. Morals tend to be driven by personal beliefs and values. There are certainly some common morals that most people agree on, such as always tell the truth, do not destroy property, have courage, keep your promises, do not cheat, treat others as you want to be treated, do not judge, and be dependable. Morality refers to the system of beliefs and values that ensures the individuals will keep their obligations to others in the society and behave in ways that do not interfere with the rights and interests of others. So I have here the example of decision making. So what is decision making? It is understandably difficult, the degree of which depending on the situation. When faced with a predicament, exercise your best judgment on the good or appropriate action to take. Make it a point to always choose the right actions even if the situation is not problematic. It takes constant practice to make appropriate decisions. It is also better to start doing it at an early age, so when you reach adulthood, you would have already internalized and developed a good sense of what is right or wrong. This way, it will be easy for you to practice moral actions as a mature and responsible adult. An individual who has a good sense of what is right and wrong will be an honest and upright member of the community. So here are the example of moral values: respect, honesty, compassion, hard work, kindness, gratitude, sharing, and cooperation.
Hey everyone, and this is my report on my part in Module 7, which was given to us, and it is entitled Moral Reasoning. So, moral reasoning refers to the judgments people make about what courses of action are incorrect in particular situations. It is according to Gehrig and Zimbardo, 2002. Moral reasoning is an individual's consciousness of making or taking actions that are correct or incorrect in particular situation. Reasoning is a cognitive skill, meaning it involves conscious intellectual activity. Reasoning influences moral development. So, Lawrence Kohlberg in 1958 came up with the theory of moral development by studying the concept of moral reasoning. So, before we proceed, let me tell you about what is the concept of moral reasoning. So, the concept of moral reasoning applies critical analysis to specific events to determine what is right or wrong, and what people ought to do in a particular situation. So, the concept of moral reasoning applies critical analysis in an specific event para ma-determine what is right and what is wrong in a given situation. And the concept of moral reasoning also states what people ought to do in a particular situation. So it is the action the person should do in a particular situation. So this theory is shaped by and tied up to Piaget's stages of intellectual development. So Piaget's theory asserts that intellectual development proceeds in stages or levels. The first stage is the sensoremotor stage, in which the child learns and develops knowledge about his or her environment by relating sensory experiences to motor actions. Based on my understanding in the sensoremotor stage, example for that is that when a child touches a hot substance, it is when the child acknowledges that this substance cannot be touched, or this substance shouldn't be touched because it can cause burn to our skin, or it can cause burn to his or her skin. So it is an example of sensoremotor stage, where the sensory senses of a child is involved. So the next one is it is followed by pre-operational stage. In pre-operational stage, it is which the child learns to use symbols like words or mental images to solve simple problems. In pre-operational stage, it states there that the child learns to use symbols like words or mental images to solve simple problems. So example for that is when a child imitates the action of the person in front of him or her. So when a person in front of him or her take an action, and when the child does the same, it is where the imitation starts. So that it is one of an example of pre-operational stage. One example also is the child or an individual drawing an object. So based on his or her observation, they can create it through their hands. It is also based on their imaginations. So that is pre-operational stage. The next one, or the third level, is the concrete operation stage. It is which the child develops the ability to perform a number of logical operations on concrete objects that are present. Concrete operation stage, it is where the child becomes aware that even though a 5 peso, even though that there's only 1 5 peso, it is still equivalent to 5 1 peso. So that explains the concrete operation stage of the intellectual developments, or the stages of intellectual development. Then the final level is the formal operation stage, in which the individual acquires the ability to solve abstract problems in a logical manner. Example for that is formal operational stage. It is where an individual can do mathematical calculations, think creatively, use abstract reasoning, and imagine the outcome of particular actions. So it is where the individual has an independent thinking, and they are aware that the results of their action can be valid and invalid as well. So this stage begins at approximately age 12, and it lasts into adulthood. Progression is related to the development of moral reasoning. Thus, the evolution of one's sense of right and wrong in making decisions depends on on his or her level of intellectual development. So this connection implies that advanced levels of intellectual development are associated with higher stages of moral development. In the same way, lower stages of intellectual development are associated with earlier stages of moral development. This explains that a child cannot exhibit advanced levels of moral development if he or she is still at an early stage of intellectual development, which is in a toddler stage. That's all. Thank you very much.
So, since you already learned about the introduction of moral reasoning presented by Mr. Gonzaga, now I am going to talk about the Kohlberg stages of moral reasoning. So, Kohlberg's theory proposes that there are 3 levels of moral development, and each level contains into stages. So, he organized these stages into 3 general levels of moral development, and these are the pre-conventional morality, conventional morality, and principled or post-conventional morality. The first level of the stages of moral reasoning is pre-conventional morality. So, the pre-conventional level is the morality is externally controlled. So, rules imposed by authority figures are conformed to in order to avoid punishment or receive rewards. So, this perspective involves the idea that what is right is what one can get away with or what is personally satisfying. So, the first level has 2 stages, which are the pleasure-pain orientation and cost-benefit orientation. So, the first stage talks about behavior is determined by consequences. So, the individual will obey in order to avoid punishment. And the second stage talks about behavior is determined again by consequences, but this time, it focuses on receiving rewards or satisfying personal needs. The second level is conventional morality. So, this conformity to social rules remains important to the individual. However, the emphasis shifts from self-interest to relationship with other people and social systems. So, the individual strives to support rules that are set forth by others, such as parents, peers, and the government in order to win their approval or to maintain social order. And the conventional morality has also two stages, which are the good child orientation and the law and order orientation. So the third stage of conventional level is behavior is determined by social approval. So the individual wants to maintain or win the affection and approval of others by being a good person. And the fourth stage talks about social rules and laws determine behavior. So the individual now takes into consideration to a larger perspective that of societal laws. So moral decision making becomes more than consideration of close ties to others. So the individual believes that rules and laws maintain social order that is worth preserving. So if we're going to compare it with the first level, which is pre-conventional level, the pre-conventional level focuses more on the individualization, while the conventional level it focuses more on the self-interest to relationships with other people. So that is how the difference between the pre-conventional and conventional level. The last level that we're going to talk about is principled or post-conventional morality of moral reasoning. The post-conventional morality is the individual moves beyond the perspective of his or her own society. Morality is defined in terms of abstract principles and values that apply to all situations and society. So the individual attempts to take the perspective of all individual. And the post-conventional or principled level has actually three stages. So these are the social contract orientation, ethical principle orientation, and lastly, cosmic orientation. The fifth stage talks about individual rights determining behavior. The individual views laws and rules as flexible tools for improving human purposes that is given to the right situation. So there are exceptions to rules. When laws are not consistent with individual rights and the interests of the majority, they do not bring about good for people and alternatives should be considered. The sixth stage, the universal ethical principle orientation. So according to Kohlberg, this is the highest stage of functioning. However, he claimed that some individuals will never reach this level. At this stage, the appropriate action is determined by one's self-chosen ethical principles of conscience. So these principles are abstract and universal in application. This type of reasoning involves taking the perspective of every person or group that could potentially be affected by the decision. And lastly, the cosmic orientation, a state of being that has overcome the limitations of physical existence and by some definitions has also become independent of it. So the moral reasoning has a great impact for us, for it enables teachers and us students to understand the different levels of moral understanding. And this moreover improve our beliefs because it is possible to believe wrong things while growing up, considering many times people don't bother telling us what is right and wrong. So many children don't get proper education about morality, which leads them into the wrong direction. And it somehow affects our learning through understanding principles of fairness, justice, and social responsibilities. So we children learn to find a balance between our own needs and wants and the interests of the greater social environment. So by placing limits on our desires, we children benefit from a greater sense of love, security, and shared identity. So in conclusion, moral development refers to the process whereby people form a progressive sense of what is right and wrong.
Types of parenting. So, parenting styles and practices. It is characterized by forces outside of the individual, like how he or she has been raised or reared by his or her parents. So, there are three Parenting Styles by Diana Baumrind in 1967. The Authoritarian, Authoritative, and Permissive. While One Parenting Styles by Maccabee and Martin on 1983. The Uninvolved or Neglected. Authoritarian parenting is an extremely strict parenting style. It places high expectations on children with little responsiveness. As an authoritarian parent, you focus more on obedience, discipline, control rather than nurturing your child. Example scenario. Precious is 13 years old. She wake up in the morning and left her room messy. Meanwhile, her mother came to her room and suddenly she called Precious and said to fix her bed before she left her room. Afterwards, every time Precious wake up in the morning, she always fixed her bed before she left her room. Authoritative. In this parenting style, the parents are nurturing, responsive, and supportive, yet set firm limits for their children. They attempt to control children's behavior by explaining rules, discussing, and reasoning. They listen to a child's viewpoint but don't always accept it. Example scenario. Claire joined a contest but she only got the second place. When she arrived in their house, she felt mad because of what happened. When her parents saw him, her mother said to him that it's okay. You already did your best. Maybe the next time you join again the contest, you can get the first place. Claire felt a loving and supportive kind of parents. Permissive. This is the parent who is afraid to set limits on children or believes a child has to be true to his or her own nature. Permissive parents are not demanding. Kids do not have many responsibilities and are allowed to regulate their behavior and the majority of their choices. Example scenario. Sophia liked to go to the mall twice a week to spend and buy whatever she wants since her parents gives any kind of amount on her card. So, the last one, uninvolved. Uninvolved parenting, sometimes referred to as neglectful parenting, is a style characterized by lack of responsiveness to a child's needs. Uninvolved parents make few to no demands of their children, and they are often indifferent, dismissive, or even completely neglectful. Example scenario. Mika's parent every morning go to the office of their company to work. Because her parents' work finish almost late nights, and because of that, she had never enough time to be with her parents to bond.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. So I will be presenting to you the different effects of parenting style towards their children. So first is the authoritative parenting style. In authoritative parenting style, children reared by authoritarian parents are more likely to grow up to be independent, self-sufficient, well-behaved, and accepted by others. Additionally, they are less prone to experience melancholy and anxiety, as well as to participate in antisocial behaviors. So these are the children na parang well-disciplined and tend to have a good mindset as they grow.
While in authoritarian parenting style,
children raised in an authoritarian environment are more likely to make poor decisions, have low self-esteem, poor social and academic skills, lack of creativity, mental health issues like depression and behavioral problems. So, amo inihiraan types of children na controlled by their parents or parang hitaas it expectation sa ira as they grow. So, it nagtetend nga nahadlok hira nga mag-fail ha usa nga bagay. So, that's what pushes them to not try at all because they're afraid of failures or they're afraid na bangin is ganhira ira parent. Sa permissive parenting style naman, children reared in this manner frequently lack a strong sense of discipline as adults. Due to lack of rules in the home, they could be more disruptive in class and have lower academic motivation than many of their peers. So these are the type of children na parang they can freely do whatever they want to do since their parents doesn't have any rules for them. So it tend sometimes na nagiging pasaway dahil wala silang rules or wala silang katatakutan na from their parents since they can freely do whatever they want to do. And lastly is the uninvolved parenting style. Majority of the time, children of uninvolved parents struggle in almost every aspect of life. These kids frequently show cognitive attachment, emotional and social skill deficiencies. So these are the type of children na parang they don't have any attachment with their parents at all. So natetend na as they grow, nagiging rebel hira or lack of love and affection since di rin nga sugad ka-attached ira parents sa ira. Parang there is nothing at all. So, amoy ito't nakaka-affect ka ira kung kaya naman
To summarize everything, our group discussed the concepts concerning moral development. So first, we discussed the concepts of morality along with dilemma, moral and moral reasoning. So again, moral and morality is defined as having to do with right and wrong with the context of societal norms and expectations. Morality is tested especially when one is placed in a dilemma in which a person has to make a decision on what best course of action to take, while taking into account that his or her decision does not disturb, offend, or hurt other people. It was also pointed that the process of moral development is in sync with the intellectual development. This implies that moral development has cognitive and intellectual foundation. As one goes through each stage of moral development, as espoused or expressed by Kohlberg, he or she experiences the corresponding stage of intellectual development, as espoused by Piaget. Second, we also discussed about Piaget's intellectual development theory, which have 4 stages: sensory motor stage, pre-operational stage, concrete operational stage, and formal operational stage. So each is characterized by development which aids in forming the child's ability to create moral reality. Third, Kohlberg's theory of moral development is divided in 2 levels: pre-conventional morality, conventional morality, and principled or post-conventional morality. Lastly, we discussed the 4 parenting styles: authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and neglectful. So to conclude, a child cannot exhibit advanced levels of moral development if they are still at an early stage of intellectual development. And when you are in a crossroad, look back into your own beliefs, philosophy, and goals as guide to what decision to make and what behavior to perform. And that's the end of our discussion for the topic Moral Self, Living with Purpose, moral values, and philosophy of life.